Imagine armed men came to your neighborhood, began killing your family and your neighbors, and the world didn't seem to notice. This isn't a hypothetical. It just happened on the coast of Syria. On March 6th, unrest erupted in Latakia and Tartus as militants affiliated with the former Assad government launched attacks on Syrian government forces. The uprising was suppressed, but it sparked a brutal response. Thousands of militants, both from Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, now part of the Syrian government, and the Turkish-backed Syrian National Army, or SNA, descended on the Syrian coast and began stealing from, assaulting, and indiscriminately killing predominantly Alawite civilians.
Allahu Akbar.
The full extent of the casualties is unclear, in large part because the new Syrian government has made free movement impossible and Alawite communities have been unable to compile complete death tolls. But more than 1,000 civilians have been killed, and that's likely a low estimate. The Alawites, an Islamic minority, make up about 10% of the population of Syria. The Assad family is Alawite. During their rule, Alawites were seen as getting preferential treatment from the regime. But Alawites who lived in Syria under the Assads say that this is an unfair generalization.
The Alawite community has long been caught in the crossfire of Syria's political struggles. The regime kept them isolated from the country's economic development, and their villages were devoid of factories, businesses, or any real infrastructure. While some Alawites supported the regime, many others have been victims of it, longing for change, but afraid to speak out.
In the past few days, social media has been flooded with virulent anti-Alawite rhetoric. People are calling for their expulsion from Syria and celebrating the horrific violence against them.
أشلاء حتى على الأرض لا تبقوهن، الأرض لا تنجسوها في دمهم.
حتى الحيتان بالبحر عم تشكرنا، حتى القرش سمك القرش عم يتشكرنا على الدعم الإنساني والغذاء الذي.
The coast must be completely cleansed of Alawites and must be resettled with Sunnis. This one's in a Facebook group for car sales. And along with the overt hatred for Alawites, many of those who've covered the massacres on the Syrian coast have been smeared as Assadists and accused of supporting the Assad regime. Let me be clear, I'm not that. I've covered the Syrian war for over a decade. I've spent time with most sides, even HTS in their previous iteration as Jabhat al-Nusra, because they kidnapped me while I was covering the Assad regime's war crimes.
الآن في مدرسة من أحد المدارس التي قام النظام بقصفها كانت هذه المدرسة.
طيب إمتى أنت كنت تفكري إن الحرب رح تنتهي هون بسوريا؟ مدة قصيرة مدة طويلة؟
لا لحتى يموتوا كل العالم يعني أظن حتى تنتهي.
The Assad regime's atrocities don't erase the brutal acts committed by the new Syrian government, and they certainly don't justify the targeting of an entire ethnic group. The sheer number of videos showing militants chasing down and killing civilians is unprecedented. In all my years covering this conflict, I've never seen such widespread enthusiasm for murder. I won't show you the gruesome executions. Instead, you should hear from those who survived this nightmare.
جثث بالطريق بحي واحد قاتلين فوق 150 إنسان.
شوفير عنا بالمدرسة اسمه أبو بشار، هو من الجندارية، ذبحوله أمه وأخته وأخوه.
علوش ذبحوني خيي، قصري علي ذبحوني خيي بالبيت، فاتوا على البيت وذبحوني بقلب البيت يا الله.
To make matters worse, the media immediately downplayed the violence, blaming the murders on clashes, fighting, and remnants of the Assad regime. Responses from foreign governments were equally insufficient. The German Foreign Ministry's call for all sides to seek peaceful solutions ignores reality. HTS and SNA militants systematically targeted Alawite civilians. It wasn't surprising that pro-HTS think tanks and sympathetic news outlets rushed to dismiss the violence on the coast. Their first move was denial. They claimed HTS and SNA forces had only targeted Assad loyalists who were attacking them. But then, HTS and SNA flooded social media with so many videos, including some showing themselves hunting down elderly men who clearly weren't involved in any military activity. Suddenly, the Assad remnants narrative didn't hold water. So the new Syrian government and their fans pivoted. Now the killers were conveniently not affiliated with the government. HTS commanders told their men to stop filming what they were doing, but not to stop doing what they were doing.
تصوير ممنوع. الأخ بده يصور بده يتحاسب.
Then came claims that all of the violence on the coast was committed by the SNA forces alone, though this HTS militant admitted to HTS's involvement while expressing horror at what his brethren were doing.
رسالتي لسماحة الشيخ أبو محمد الجولاني أحمد الشرع ولكل القادة العسكريين. يا شيخ، هالقتل يلي صار قتل المدنيين الآمنين في بيوتهم، هل ديننا أمرنا بهالشهاد؟
Immediately, people accused him of being an Alawite. Since the fall of Assad in December, incidents of kidnapping, murder, and other abuses have often been blamed solely on the SNA, despite evidence implicating HTS as well. And in the recent coastal violence, foreign HTS jihadis also filmed themselves taking part in atrocities. This is Egyptian Arabic. There aren't any Egyptians in the SNA. Recently, dynamics within the SNA have been shifting significantly. Turkey already ceded much of the administrative control of the SNA to HTS. An SNA commander told me that salary payments for most factions now depend on SNA militants agreeing to join HTS, which is all to say that the lines between these groups are becoming blurred. In an apparent attempt to counteract viral murder videos shared by their own militants, both HTS and SNA commanders have posted highly staged encounters with civilians. Jolani, or Ahmad al-Shara, promised accountability for the violence on the coast. Some militants seen in murder videos were arrested, but given HTS's history, these actions seem more like PR than real justice. On Monday, al-Shara and SDF commander Mazloum Abdi signed a memorandum of understanding to integrate the SDF into the Syrian armed forces. The deal promised to preserve Kurdish rights through local governance. Virtually all of Syria took to the streets in celebration. Reminder, the violence on the coast was still unfolding at this point. Imagine being an Alawite in Latakia whose relatives were murdered by Syrian government forces, and a day later, the whole country is celebrating the government. By Thursday, the celebrations had stopped, because al-Shara signed a new constitution granting himself sweeping powers, including control over parliament and the Supreme Court. It also failed to mention Christians, Kurds, Yazidis, and other minorities. The Syrian Democratic Council immediately condemned the constitution, calling it authoritarianism rebranded. While the Alawites are the biggest target currently, other minorities aren't safe from harassment at the hands of the Syrian government. In the past few days, Christians and homes have also been targeted. There have been reports of kidnappings, executions, and assaults on homes and businesses. With so many large-scale atrocities happening, smaller incidents of harassment often go unnoticed. A Christian man in a major city was harassed by a Syrian government officer for drinking coffee in a cafe during Ramadan, a time when Muslims typically fast.
I was sitting at this cafe, just having coffee. All of a sudden, an HTS General Security Officer walks in with his, firearm, and he kind of nodded to me from afar and said, "Are you Sunni?" I was like, "No, I'm Christian." And then he approached me, and the first thing he said, "Why are you being disrespectful? Ramadan and people are fasting and they're coming and going outside the cafe and you're just eating and drinking in plain sight." And then, the discussion here up a little bit.
After the fall of Assad, Jolani insisted that Christians in Syria were safe and could freely practice their religion.
Now, the narrative is still the same, but they're constantly pressing the church leadership to succumb to the will of the state. I mean, all patriarchs, they don't have confidence in this government. At the end of the day, we know who they are. Terrorists and extremists don't reform overnight. So we know what has been done, what has been said, is just to win over the West, for the purpose of sanctions lifting and, taking HTS and Jolani himself, Ahmad al-Shara, off the terror list. No minority group is safe in Syria, whether it's the Christians, the Druze, the Alawites, no one is safe. They will come for each group in due time.